The airfield fell silent in a way that made men forget how to breathe. Tower controllers leaned forward into their headsets, squinting at radar signatures that refused to make sense. The A-10 Thunderbolt II materializing through the smoke-thick Iraqi sky on March 17, 2003, was missing its entire vertical stabilizer. The tail section had been sheared away by what intelligence later confirmed was a direct hit from a 57 anti-aircraft gun. Physics said the aircraft should have tumbled into a fireball 12 minutes ago. Physics said a lot of things that morning, and Captain Iris Kovac was proving every equation wrong. Her call sign was Matchstick, a name she'd earned 3 years earlier during a training exercise gone sideways when she landed a crippled F-16 on fumes and a prayer. The nose gear collapsed, sparks trailing behind her like she was striking fire against the runway. The name stuck not because it was kind, but because it captured something the men around her refused to admit they saw. Someone who kept burning even when the world tried to snuff her out. The general who'd opposed her combat deployment stood in the operations center now, his jaw slack, watching the impossible unfold on grainy live feed. He'd told the review board 2 years prior that women lacked the upper body strength for sustained close air support missions, that the psychological pressure would fracture them when rounds started tearing through aluminum. He'd used words like biological limitations and unit cohesion, while Iris sat in the back of that Pentagon conference room, her face carved from stone, her hands folded so tight her knuckles went white. She hadn't said a word. She'd simply requested deployment to the Forward Air Control Squadron operating out of Ahmed Al-Jaber Air Base, Kuwait. They'd given it to her because the casualties were mounting and they needed pilots who could fly low, slow, and angry. Now the radio crackled with her voice, steady despite hydraulic failure, despite the stick fighting her like a living thing, despite the fact that every aviator listening knew she was wrestling a 30-ton warplane through the sky with nothing but throttle differential and the kind of nerve that can't be taught in simulators. Tower, Matchstick 2-1, declaring emergency. Hydraulics are toast, flight controls approximately 30% responsive, tails gone, keeping her level with engines. Request straighten approach, runway 27. Her tone carried the flatness of someone solving a math problem, not someone dancing with death at 400 knots. The desert stretched below her like crumpled parchment, and somewhere in the smoke she'd just escaped, a convoy of Marines owed their lives to the payload she delivered danger close, so close the shockwave had rattled her teeth. The ground controller's voice came back tight with something between awe and terror. Matchstick 2-1, you are cleared for any approach you can manage. Crash crews are rolling. Wind is 270 at 8 knots. There was a pause, then quieter, almost a whisper. Bring her home. Iris didn't respond immediately. Her eyes tracked the horizon where the airfield shimmered in heat distortion, a thin gray line between earth and sky. The A-10 shuddered beneath her, the airframe groaning with stress fractures she could feel through the seat. She nudged the throttles, felt the asymmetric thrust try to yaw her into a spin, compensated with aileron pressure that screamed through her forearms. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her face. Her flight suit was soaked through. Somewhere behind her visor, behind the stone-faced calm she'd learned to wear like armor, a small voice whispered that this was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The moment she'd prove them right. The moment the experiment failed. But Iris Kovac had been proving people wrong since she was 8 years old, standing in her dead father's workshop, holding his Purple Heart, promising his ghost she'd fly the missions he never came home from. She'd proven wrong every recruiter who'd steered her toward transport aircraft, every flight instructor who'd suggested she'd be happier in a tanker, every well-meaning mentor who'd warned that combat aviation would chew her up. She'd earned her wings not through concessions but through perfect scores, through outflying men who had every advantage except the one that mattered, the kind of focus that comes from having everything to prove and nothing left to lose. The A-10's nose dipped as she bled off altitude, the stick mushy and unresponsive in her grip. She was flying on pure engine thrust now, adjusting power like a sailor trimming sails, intuiting the aircraft's behavior through tiny variations in vibration and sound. The runway grew larger in her canopy, a thin strip of salvation surrounded by miles of sand and scrub. Emergency vehicles raced along the taxiway, their lights flashing silent urgency. She could see foam trucks taking position, ambulances, the crash crew in their silver suits standing ready to pull her from wreckage. "Gear down," she said aloud to herself, reaching for the emergency extension handle. The mechanical backup system groaned, and she felt the landing gear lock into place with three solid thumps that resonated through the airframe. No hydraulics meant no brakes, no steering, just momentum and friction, and whatever grace the universe still owed her. She ran the numbers in her head. Touchdown speed, rollout distance, the weight of a thunderbolt that had burned through most of its fuel, but still carried the mass of titanium armor wrapped around the cockpit like a bathtub. The ground effect caught her at 50 feet, settling onto an invisible cushion of compressed air. She felt it in her stomach, that moment of suspension before gravity reasserted itself. Her hands moved with practiced precision, throttles back, nose up slightly to bleed speed, the runway threshold rushing up to meet her landing gear. Contact was a shuddering bang that rattled her spine, the main gear biting into concrete, the nose gear following a heartbeat later. Without hydraulics, the aircraft wanted to swerve, wanted to ground loop into a cartwheeling disaster. Iris manipulated the throttles individually, goozing the right engine to counter the yaw, her boots dancing on rudder pedals that barely responded. They rolled down the center line like a drunk walking a tightrope, veering left, correcting right, each wobble bringing gasps from the tower observers. 1,200 feet, 900, 600. The end of the runway approached with mathematical certainty, and beyond it lay dirt, rocks, and the inglorious end of what should have been a legendary landing. Iris fed power to both engines in a final desperate bid for asymmetric braking, the thrust reversers unavailable without hydraulics. The Thunderbolt shuddered, protested, and finally began to slow. 300 feet from the overrun, the aircraft settled into a crawl. 200 feet walking pace. At 50 feet from disaster, the A-10 stopped. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the canopy cracked open, hydraulic assist replaced by Iris's manual override. She pulled off her helmet, her hair plastered to her skull with sweat, her hands trembling now that adrenaline had nowhere left to go. The crash crew reached her first, shouting questions she couldn't quite hear over the ringing in her ears. She waved them off, descended the ladder under her own power, and stood beside the crippled aircraft, staring at the torn metal where her tail used to be. Someone handed her a bottle of water. She drank it in silence. The general arrived in a Humvee, dust trailing behind him like a contrail. He climbed out slowly, studying the A-10 with the expression of a man reassessing fundamental beliefs. When he reached Iris, she straightened instinctively, muscle memory demanding military bearing even when exhaustion screamed for collapse. He didn't salute. Instead, he walked past her to the aircraft, running his hand along the fuselage, tracing the jagged edges where cannon fire had nearly ended everything. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the flight line. "Captain Kavek, I owe you an apology I don't know how to give." Iris said nothing. The wind picked up, carrying sand across the runway in serpentine patterns. Somewhere in the operations center, intelligence officers were already reviewing gun camera footage, counting the armor kills, calculating the lives saved. 8 Bradley fighting vehicles, 43 Marines, one pilot who'd refused to brake when braking was the reasonable choice. The general turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never expected, shame mixed with respect, the painful birth of understanding. "I told them you'd never survive combat deployment," he continued. "I used every argument I had. I was wrong. Worse than wrong, I was blind." The news crews arrived that evening, satellite trucks and reporters with practiced smiles, but Iris declined every interview. She sat instead in the empty ready room, cleaning her flight gear with methodical precision, her movements slow and deliberate. The other pilots gave her space, uncertain how to approach someone who'd just rewritten the manual on impossible. Only her wingman, Captain Marcus Webb, call sign paperweight for reasons involving a particularly unfortunate incident with a clipboard and a helicopter rotor wash, dared to sit beside her. He didn't speak at first, just set down 2 cups of terrible coffee and waited. "You know they're going to make this a thing," he finally said. Iris looked up from the helmet she was polishing. "What thing?" Her voice was hoarse from breathing recycled air and screaming into radios. Marcus gestured vaguely toward the flight line where maintenance crews were already swarming the damaged A-10. "Hero thing. The pilot who conquered physics. They'll write it up, pin medals on you, use it for recruitment. You're going to be the poster." He said it without judgment, simply stating facts the way pilots do when emotion becomes too heavy. Iris set down the helmet. Her reflection stared back from its visor, distorted and strange. "I'm not a hero, Marcus, I just didn't quit." The distinction mattered to her in ways she couldn't articulate. Heroes were people who chose bravery. She'd simply chosen between quitting and quitting had never been an option encoded in her DNA. Marcus sipped his coffee, made a face at its bitterness. "Yeah, well, to everyone watching you thread that needle, it looked like a whole lot more than not quitting. You made believers out of people who thought they'd seen everything." Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. The A-10 sat on the ramp like a wounded bird, its absence of tail section somehow more dramatic in the golden hour light. Maintenance crews had already begun cataloging the damage. 73 separate hits from small arms fire, 4 larger caliber strikes, and the catastrophic loss of all flight control surfaces aft of the wing root. The aircraft was technically repairable, but more valuable as a lesson, a testament to both engineering and human will. They'd eventually retire it to a museum with a plaque that would tell only part of the story. Iris's phone buzzed with messages she wouldn't read. Her mother probably having seen something on the news. Her younger brother, serving with the army in Tikrit, who'd send something brief and proud. Friends from flight school who'd made different choices, flown different missions, wondering if they'd have had the strength when the tail came off, and physics offered only one reasonable answer. She silenced the phone and closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion finally claim its due. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she was back in the cockpit, feeling the stick fight her, hearing the alarms, making the 1,000 tiny decisions that added up to survival. The debriefing came at 0:30, a room full of senior officers who'd flown in from Qatar and Kuwait City, their uniforms crisp, their questions sharp. Iris walked them through the mission timeline with the precision of a technical manual. Ingress at Angels 5. Visual acquisition of enemy positions at grid November Victor 7342. Marines requesting immediate fire support. ZSU-57 AAA opened up during her gun run. She'd felt the impacts, the aircraft shuddering, alarms cascading across her panel. The tail section separated during egress, the aircraft immediately attempting to enter an inverted spin. Recovery through differential thrust, nursing the wounded bird north toward friendly airspace, every mile a negotiation with aerodynamics. A colonel with pilot wings and too many ribbons leaned forward. "Captain, at what point did you consider ejection?" It wasn't an accusation, just professional curiosity. Iris met his eyes. "Never seriously, sir. The A-10 was still responding to inputs. Ejection over hostile territory meant capture or worse. The aircraft wanted to fly. I just had to convince it we were going the same direction." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone made a note. The colonel nodded slowly. "And the landing approach? Talk us through your calculation." She explained the physics she'd intuited rather than calculated. Using engine thrust as her primary flight control, the delicate balance of power settings to maintain heading, the decision to land long rather than risk floating into a stall on short final. She'd given up the first 3,000 feet of runway to ensure she had speed and control, betting that momentum was her friend. The math had been simple even if the execution was anything but. Land fast, land long, let friction do what brakes couldn't. The room absorbed this in silence. These were men who'd flown combat, who understood the difference between textbook theory and the improvisation that kept you alive when the textbook burst into flames. The intelligence officer showed her the gun camera footage next. She watched herself on the screen, a third-person view of violence she'd experienced from the inside. The A-10 rolled in on target, cannon spooling up, that distinctive growl of the GAU-8 Avenger that sounded like the world tearing apart. 30mm rounds walked across enemy positions with surgical precision. The ZSU-57 that killed her tail appeared in frame, its barrels flashing. Then the camera shook, jerked, and the perspective tilted as she fought for control. Watching it from the outside felt surreal, like viewing someone else's near-death experience. 17 confirmed kills, the intelligence officer stated. 3 armored vehicles, 2 anti-aircraft positions, 12 infantry contacts. You eliminated the ambush that had 3rd Battalion pinned down for 6 hours. Casualty estimates if that convoy had been overrun, 80%. He closed the laptop. Numbers on a spreadsheet, lives reduced to percentages, but Iris understood what he wasn't saying. 80% of 43 was 34 men who wouldn't have gone home. 34 families who'd have received flags and condolences, instead of phone calls and reunion videos. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. She'd known abstractly that close air support saved lives, but seeing the numbers made it concrete. 34 ghosts that didn't exist because she kept flying when logic suggested surrender. The briefing concluded with handshakes and commendations she barely registered. A bronze star with Valor device was mentioned. Distinguished flying cross likely. Words that felt hollow compared to the simple fact that she'd done her job and survived. Outside the briefing room, Marcus waited with a knowing look. "Let me guess," he said. "They're making you a symbol." Iris rubbed her eyes. Dawn was breaking across the airfield, painting the sky in shades of rose and pearl. Something like that. They want me to talk to reporters, do press conferences, show the folks back home that the program works. She said it without bitterness, simply exhausted. Marcus fell into step beside her as they walked toward the flight line. "You going to do it?" She watched the sun clear the horizon. "What choice do I have? If my face on a recruitment poster gets more women into cockpits, maybe the next one won't have to fight as hard for a chance." The A-10 community was small, insular, a tribe of pilots who loved an ugly aircraft that had been threatened with retirement more times than anyone could count. They flew low and slow, absorbed punishment that would down faster jets, and came home with battle damage that looked like abstract art. Iris had found her people among them. Men and women who respected capability over credentials, who judged you by what you did when the sky started falling. Now she was becoming something else. A symbol, a story, a lesson for people who'd never pulled G's or taste the metallic fear of combat. The next morning brought a visitor she didn't expect. General Patricia Dunham, commander of the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing, arrived without fanfare. She was a legend in the fighter community, one of the first women to fly F-15s in combat, a pilot who'd navigated the same institutional skepticism Iris faced but 20 years earlier. She found Iris in the maintenance hangar, supervising the damage assessment on her A-10. The general dismissed the enlisted personnel with a nod and stood beside Iris, both of them staring at the wounded aircraft. "They told me the same things they told you," General Dunham said quietly. "Not strong enough, too emotional, unit cohesion. I broke my hand punching a wall after one particular review board." She showed Iris a slight crook in her right index finger, a permanent souvenir of rage that had nowhere productive to go. "I thought proving them wrong would be enough. It never was. There was always another board, another skeptic, another well-meaning mentor suggesting I'd be happier doing something else." Iris traced the bullet holes in the fuselage, each one a moment when physics had suggested she should die and luck or skill had intervened. "Does it get easier?" The question came out smaller than she intended. General Dunham considered this. "No, but it gets clearer. You stop trying to prove them wrong and start flying for the people who need you. Those Marines didn't care about your gender. They cared that you showed up when the sky was full of lead and everything reasonable said to turn around. They stood in silence, two generations of pilots separated by years but connected by the invisible thread of being first, of kicking down doors that shouldn't have been locked. Finally, General Dunham turned to leave, then paused. The general who opposed your deployment asked to speak with you. I told him you were unavailable, but if you want the meeting, I'll arrange it. Iris shook her head. Nothing he can say will change what he believed, and nothing I can say will teach him what he should have already known. The missions continued. 2 days after her emergency landing, Iris was back in the cockpit, flying a different A-10 with a fresh tail and full hydraulics. The muscle memory returned immediately, the comfortable weight of the aircraft around her, the familiar growl of the engines. She flew close air support for an army patrol near Nasiriyah, put rockets through a building concealing enemy machine guns, circled overhead until every soldier was accounted for and safe. The radio calls were professional, gratitude expressed through tactical brevity. Good effects on target matchstick. You just saved our afternoon. But something had shifted in how the other pilots treated her. The casual dismissals, the subtle condescension that had colored interactions before, had evaporated. Now when she walked into the operations briefing, conversations didn't pause. When she offered tactical opinions, people listened instead of waiting for her to finish so they could correct her. The call sign Matchstick, once a backhanded compliment tinged with mockery, had become something else. A mark of respect, a name that meant you kept burning no matter what tried to extinguish you. Marcus noticed it too. You've been knighted, he said one evening over dinner that tasted like cardboard and came from a plastic tray. Accepted into the Brotherhood, only took you flying a broken aircraft through hell and landing it on skill and pure spite. Iris stabbed at something that might have been chicken. I shouldn't have had to nearly die to get basic respect. The frustration leaked through despite her attempt to keep it contained. Marcus nodded. You're right, you shouldn't have. But you did, and now you're here. And every woman who comes after you won't have to make quite as hard a landing. The mail came in irregular intervals, canvas bags full of letters that supply clerks sorted with casual efficiency. Iris received a stack that surprised her, letters from girls she'd never met, daughters of service members, students writing thank you notes as class assignments. They all said variations of the same thing. I didn't know women could do that. I want to be like you. One letter came from a 12-year-old in Nebraska whose father was flying F-16s in Turkey. She'd included a drawing of an A-10 with a crude but heartfelt patch job on the tail, stick figures of pilots drawn with careful detail. Iris kept that drawing, folded it carefully and tucked it into her flight suit pocket. It stayed there through subsequent missions, through the grinding routine of combat deployment, through days when exhaustion made her question why she'd chosen this particular path through life. On the hardest days, when doubt crept in like sand through the seams of her tent, she'd take out that drawing and remember that she was flying for someone beyond herself. Every mission was a brick in a bridge. She was building for girls who weren't yet old enough to dream of cockpits. The combat tour stretched on. April bled into May, the heat intensifying until the air itself felt hostile. Iris flew 93 combat missions, accumulated over 200 combat hours, and brought her aircraft home every single time. She became known for her precision, her ability to thread ordnance through impossibly tight constraints when friendly forces needed fire support that couldn't afford collateral damage. The forward air controllers requested her by call sign, asked for matchstick when the mission was delicate and failure wasn't an option. But the mission that defined her second act came on May 14th, during what should have been a routine patrol. An Army Special Forces team had been compromised deep in Anbar Province, 15 operators surrounded by an enemy force triple their size. The mission brief was stark: extract or cover. Extraction helicopters were 30 minutes out. The team had maybe 10. Iris launched with Marcus as her wingman, both A-10s loaded for close air support, both pilots understanding that routine had just become anything but. The team's controller came up on frequency, his voice tight with the controlled panic of someone managing chaos. Matchstick, Dagger 1-6. We are danger close on all sides, taking effective fire from multiple positions. We need immediate suppression, north and east quadrants, grid transmitted. Iris copied the coordinates, her mind already calculating approach vectors. Danger close meant 50 meters or less. In practical terms, it meant threading cannon fire between friendlies and enemies with almost no margin for error. It meant trusting her gun camera, her training, and the steadiness of her hands. She rolled in from the north, the ground rising to meet her at altitude that made every anti-aircraft gun in the province pucker with optimism. The targeting pod showed her everything. The Special Forces team in a wadi, their defensive perimeter marked by the distinctive pattern of American muzzle flashes, and surrounding them, converging like wolves, the enemy positions. Iris selected her cannon, checked her altitude, and squeezed the trigger. The A-10 shuddered as the GAU-8 spun up, and the ground below erupted in geysers of dust and steel. She walked the fire across enemy positions with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, each burst exactly where it needed to be, each impact shattering cover and sending bodies tumbling. Marcus followed her in, offset by 30 degrees, his rockets impacting the eastern positions in simultaneous blooms of fire. The radio crackled with the ground controller's updates, his voice climbing an octave with each successful strike. Good hits, keep it coming, you're breaking their momentum. Iris pulled off target, climbed back to pattern altitude, and immediately set up for another run. The dance continued for 12 minutes that felt like hours. Run in, deliver ordnance, break off, reposition, run in again. The A-10s circled overhead like guardian angels carved from titanium and fury, their presence alone enough to shatter enemy morale. By the time the extraction helicopters arrived, the Special Forces team was battered but intact, every operator accounted for, their position secured by a ring of devastation that had once been an overwhelming enemy force. The team lead came up on frequency as the helicopters lifted off, his voice carrying exhaustion and gratitude. Matchstick, Dagger 1-6, you just saved 15 lives. I owe you a drink I'll never be able to repay. Iris didn't respond immediately. She watched the helicopters disappear into the south, dark insects against a sky going purple with dusk. Finally, she keyed her mic. No debt, Dagger, it's what we do. She meant it. This was the mission, the purpose, the reason she'd fought through every obstacle and dismissal. Not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this when her skill meant someone's father came home, someone's husband sent another email, someone's brother got to grow old enough to tell the story. Back at base, the Special Forces team was waiting on the ramp when she landed. All 15 of them, still in combat gear, weapons slung, faces drawn with the particular exhaustion that comes from looking at death and walking away. As Iris climbed down from the cockpit, they formed an impromptu honor line, a gesture of respect that transcended rank or service branch. Their team sergeant, a man with more scar tissue than smooth skin and eyes that had seen too much, extended his hand. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 20 years. That was the finest display of close air support I've ever seen." Iris shook his hand, felt the calluses and the strength, the grip of someone who meant every word. "I'm just glad I was airborne when you needed me." The simplicity of her response seemed to catch him off guard. He'd expected bravado perhaps, or false modesty, but what he got was simple honesty. They talked for a few minutes, trading the kind of shop talk that comes naturally to people who have shared violence. Then the team loaded into trucks and disappeared toward their compound, and Iris was left standing on the flight line, watching the sun complete its extinction across the western horizon. The story of the mission spread through the base like wildfire through dry grass. By the next morning, everyone from the wing commander to the enlisted supply clerks knew about Matchstick and the Special Forces rescue. Details got embellished in the retelling, numbers inflated, danger magnified, until Iris barely recognized the mission she'd flown. But beneath the exaggeration lived a truth that couldn't be distorted. When it mattered most, she delivered. The doubters who remained fell silent. The believers found their faith confirmed. General Dunham called her in for a private conversation, just the two of them in an office that smelled of dust and air conditioning pushed beyond its capacity. "You're being considered for the Silver Star," she said without preamble. "The Special Forces colonel is pushing hard for it, says it's the most precise fire support mission he's seen in 3 deployments. Iris absorbed this quietly. Medals were nice, she supposed, but they felt distant from the reality of what she'd done. "I was just doing the job, ma'am." The general smiled, the expression carrying years of similar conversations. "That's what makes you good at it, Captain. You're not flying for glory, but whether you like it or not, you're creating a legacy. Every mission you fly, every impossible thing you make look routine, you're changing what people believe is possible. That matters more than you know." She pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. "I'm recommending you for an instructor slot at Nellie's when this deployment ends. The weapons school needs someone who can teach advanced close air support, someone who's done it for real." Iris opened the folder, scanned the orders that would take her from combat to classroom, from the sharp edge to the sharpening stone. Part of her recoiled at the idea of leaving the mission, but another part recognized the opportunity. At Nellie's, she could train the next generation, pass on not just tactics but the philosophy that kept you alive when the situation went sideways. She could be for someone else what no one had been for her. A mentor who believed in capability regardless of what chromosomes you carried. "I accept, ma'am," she said finally. General Dunham nodded, something like relief crossing her features. "Good, because the fight we're in isn't just overseas. It's in every briefing room where someone dismisses a female pilot because of assumptions. It's in every review board that questions capability because it doesn't match their mental image. You're winning that fight too, Captain, one mission at a time." The general stood, extended her hand. "Your father would be proud. Not just of your flying, but of your character." The mention of her father hit Iris like unexpected turbulence. She'd carried his Purple Heart through flight school, through every check ride, through the endless gauntlet of proving herself. He'd been an Army door gunner in Vietnam, KIA when Iris was 6 months old, his sacrifice reduced to a folded flag and a medal in a presentation case. She'd built her life as a continuation of his, a way to finish the mission he'd started. Flying wasn't just a career, it was a promise kept to a ghost. She spent her last weeks in theater flying with the same intensity as her first, understanding that complacency killed more pilots than enemy fire. Every mission was flown by the book, every approach calculated, every risk weighed against necessity. She flew her 100th combat mission on June 3rd, a routine patrol that stayed routine, the kind of mission where nothing happened and you were grateful for the boredom. Marcus flew her wing, as he had for most of the deployment, the two of them comfortable enough in the air to communicate through formation position as much as radio calls. As they recovered to base, the sun setting behind them, Iris reflected on how much had changed since March. She'd arrived as an outsider, someone whose presence was tolerated but not celebrated. She was leaving as matchstick, a call sign that carried weight now, spoken with respect by people who measured worth through action. The aircraft beneath her responded to her inputs like an extension of her will. The A-10 no longer just a machine but a partner in violence, a tool she'd learned to wield with artisan precision. The final mission came without fanfare. June 15th, a close air support tasking for a marine company clearing insurgent positions south of Baghdad. Iris flew lead, Marcus on her wing, both of them executing the kind of textbook tactics they could do in their sleep. Coordinates confirmed, friendlies marked with infrared strobes, targets acquired through the targeting pod. She delivered her ordnance with clinical precision, watched secondary explosions bloom across her targeting screen, received confirmation from the ground controller that the mission was successful. 20 minutes of violence, then the long flight home. Crossing back into friendly airspace, Iris keyed her radio to Marcus. Last dance, paperweight. It's been an honor. His response came back warm with the friendship forged through shared danger. Likewise, matchstick. Let's get these birds home clean. They landed in formation, the two A-10s touching down simultaneously in a display of synchronized precision that drew applause from the ground crews. As Iris shut down her engines for the last time in theater, she felt the weight of the deployment settle across her shoulders. 107 combat missions, 0 losses, countless lives saved through ordnance delivered with precision and care. The departure ceremony was small, just her squadron and a few senior officers. General Dunham pinned the silver star on Iris's chest, the metal heavy and cold against her flight suit. The citation was read aloud, detailing the Special Forces rescue with language that sounded grandiose to Iris's ears, but made the assembled pilots nod with recognition. She'd earned it the hard way, through skill and composure when both were tested to breaking. The applause that followed felt genuine, the kind of recognition that comes from peers who understand exactly what it costs. Marcus gave her a gift before she boarded the transport, a patch featuring a burned matchstick over crossed A-10 silhouettes, hand-embroidered by someone in the squadron. "For the legend," he said with a grin that didn't quite hide his emotion. "Don't forget us ordinary mortals when you're teaching the next generation how to be invincible." Iris hugged him, one of the few moments she'd allowed herself physical expression of the bonds forged through deployment. Invincible is a myth. I just got lucky more times than I had any right to expect. The flight home was long, uncomfortable, and punctuated by stops at bases across Europe. Iris spent most of it sleeping, the kind of deep exhaustion-driven sleep that comes when adrenaline finally releases its grip. She dreamed of the sky over Iraq, of the way the desert looked from 8,000 feet, of the particular quality of light just before dawn when the world existed in shades of gray. She dreamed of her father, standing in his army greens, proud and forever young, nodding his approval for a mission completed. Landing at Nellis Air Force Base felt surreal, the Nevada desert so similar to Iraq, but overlaid with the familiar infrastructure of home. Her mother waited at the terminal, older than Iris remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper but the pride unmistakable. They didn't speak much, just held each other in the way of people who have learned that words are insufficient for some things. Later, over dinner in a restaurant that felt absurdly peaceful, her mother asked the question Iris had been dreading. Was it worth it? Iris considered this, turning the question over like a stone she was examining for flaws. Every time I delivered ordnance, I was saving someone. Every mission flown was someone's father, son, husband coming home. In that context, every difficult moment, every obstacle I had to overcome to get into that cockpit, yeah, it was worth it. Her mother nodded, understanding perhaps better than Iris expected. Your father used to say something similar, that the hard part wasn't the danger. It was knowing that if you failed, someone paid the price. The weapons school began in August, Iris transitioning from combat pilot to instructor with the uncomfortable awareness that she was now responsible for shaping minds as much as flying aircraft. The students in her first class were a mix of seasoned pilots and promising young officers, all of them arriving with their own assumptions and prejudices. She addressed them on day one, standing in front of a classroom that suddenly felt more intimidating than any enemy fire. "I'm Captain Kovac. Call sign Matchstick. I'll be teaching advanced close air support tactics. What I won't be teaching is how to be comfortable. This course will push you past where you think your limits are because combat doesn't care about comfort." The curriculum was brutal by design, combining classroom academics with simulator work and live fire exercises that replicated the chaos of actual missions. Iris taught them to think 3 moves ahead, to calculate wind drift and target motion while pulling Gs and managing fuel states, to communicate with ground controllers in the clipped, efficient language of people under fire. She taught them that precision mattered more than volume, that one well-placed burst from the GAU-8 was worth more than a full rocket pod delivered sloppily. But more than tactics, she taught them mindset. The moment you decide you can't do something is the moment you start looking for excuses to fail, she told them after a particularly difficult simulator exercise. I've had people tell me I couldn't fly combat because of my gender. I had an aircraft lose its tail at 400 knots and people assumed I'd die. Every assumption was wrong because I decided they were wrong.